Hi there, my name is Melissa McGuire. Previously, you have been introduced to interviews and qualitative research. We have discussed the strengths and weaknesses of this methodology and validity issues and assumptions. In this presentation, I will highlight an example of a qualitative exploratory study that used interviews for data collection. We will take an in-depth look at the methodologies of an interview-based qualitative study. The study I will use is titled Traumatic Childbirth Experiences, Practice-Based Implications for Maternity Care Professionals from the Woman's Perspective. The researchers used in-person, semi-structured interviews to gain a deeper understanding and description of women's traumatic birth experiences. Based on the participants' responses and in conjunction with current literature, it was the researchers' goal to generate a theory leading to recommendations for healthcare professionals. As previously explained in our introduction page, interviews are especially useful in collecting a lot of information pertaining to a complex phenomenon that can then be used to generate theories to explain it. For this reason, researchers do not propose hypotheses, rather they are looking for trends in the data that they collect. This study did just that and is therefore a great example of qualitative exploratory research. The research design was based on the grounded theory. It is common in qualitative research to select theories that are used to inform data collection techniques, interpretation or analysis of data, and then finally discussions. The grounded theory looks at empirical data to generate theories. Therefore, these theories are grounded in data, hence the name. This design was selected for this study because it was the most suitable for identifying trends related to women's intrapartum needs to then generate recommendations for healthcare professionals. These recommendations would hopefully help inform practice so that women are less likely to perceive their birth experience as traumatic. These researchers went to Facebook to find participants. They originally was posted to Dutch Birth Movement Facebook group. Participants self-identified as women who had experienced what they referred to as a traumatic delivery. Group members were also encouraged to share the invite. This is an example of purposeful sampling and snowballing. Snowballing in qualitative research refers to when one participant leads to the next. This method is sometimes seen as a disadvantage since participants end up from a selected group of the general population. Furthermore, participants for this study self-identified and participation was voluntary. The researchers commented on the limitation to this approach. Self-identification can lead to sampling biases. Sampling bias has been discussed already in the tab labeled Limitations and Strengths. As the data collection process progressed, these researchers then moved to theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling is a key research process within grounded theory. This method relies on identifying key concepts from data that's already been collected to then guide where, how, and from whom further data should be collected. Theoretical sampling is defined as seeking and collecting pertinent data to elaborate and refine categories and emerging themes. These researchers did not provide evidence or an explanation of how this sampling technique was implemented. It is common for methodologies of qualitative studies to omit this important information. These researchers conducted 36 semi-structured interviews. More information pertaining to semi-structured interviews can be found under the Introductions tab. As mentioned in the Assumptions tab, a comfortable environment for participants is important to consider when hosting interviews. Therefore, these interviews were hosted at the participant's home. Each interview was attended by two authors, one to lead the interview and the other to take field notes on nonverbal communication. This approach helps with gathering all empirical data to aid in coding and the formulation of categories and themes. Oftentimes, interviews can be video recorded for the same reason. Unfortunately, face-to-face interviews tend to be time-consuming and resource-intensive. These 36 interviews took 2 months to complete. The interviewers were midwifery students with extensive knowledge and clinical practice. Therefore, as per grounded theory, the interviewers reflected on their own ideas, thoughts, and feelings in the attempt to reduce interviewer and observant expectancy biases. Ethical considerations aligned with ethical principles of the central community of research involving human subjects and written consent was obtained. The researchers also allowed participants to stop the interview at any time without any explanation. All of the midwifery students that were interviewers in this research were trained by certified counselors in interview techniques and taught how to conduct an interactive and free-flow conversation led by the participant. 3 standard questions were asked of each participant. It was the interviewer's responsibility to motivate discussion by the respondents. The 3 prompting, open-ended questions, as per a semi-structured interview, generates open and broad interview topics and allows participants to tell their lived experience. The goal of interviews is to maximize the depth of responses. From the data collected, the researchers were able to produce labels or concepts, then cluster them in preliminary categories, and then order these categories into 3 major themes. Meaningful sections of transcripts were discussed among authors to allow for a broader interpretive process, identification of concepts, and development of themes. As you can see here, this is a segment of transcript the researchers chose to showcase in their study. They used this quotation as evidence of a few key concepts that emerged from the interviews. You can see the depth of information an author can gain through interviews. Interviews can provide a lot of detail of a complex phenomenon. I'll give you some time here now to read this quotation. This study produced 3 major themes from the interview transcripts and supported their findings with current literature. Once interview data is organized and analyzed into themes, then the researchers must interpret the meaning within the context of the research question. And they did just that. The interview method provided the authors the opportunity to dissect the woman's subjective experiences and use them to formulate recommendations for professionals. The goal was to better prepare professionals in the clinical setting to reduce incidents of what women define as traumatic birth experiences. One of the benefits of interviews is that people can freely describe personal experiences, feelings, or ideas without having to define them on a numerical scale or in writing. Interviews, coding, and analysis can yield important intricacies of human behavior and can answer the hard questions like how and why of complex social phenomena. During the presentation, I briefly commented on some strengths and limitations. A notable strength to this study's design is the extensive self-reflection and self-scrutiny interviewers participated in. This aligns with expectations outlined by the grounded theory. Self-reflection increases interviewers' awareness of potential bias and preconceived judgments that can impact how they lead interviews and interpret data. Self-reflection helps to reduce interviewer bias. This study identified limitations common in interview-based qualitative research. As previously discussed, purposeful sampling and self-identification can lead to sampling bias. Recall bias is also a limitation because theories are based on data collected from participants' memories only. In this study, women were expected to recall their birth experiences. Therefore, the accuracy of their memories might have been influenced by the pain that they endured, medications, or emotions experienced during this time. Transferability in research refers to the extent to which findings can be generalized to other settings. These researchers commented transferability was reduced since participants were only women proficient in the Dutch language and women that wanted to participate. A person with a very traumatic birth experience or debilitating postpartum depression may not have decided to participate. Therefore, they suggest expanding the sample population to enhance the transferability of findings. Please refer to the tab labeled Strengths and Limitations for more information pertaining to interviews in general. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Please follow along to the next tab for discussion questions and a learning activity. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you learned something.